Let's talk about the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It was an amazing event that took place in the history of the Arabs. They used to gauge their calendar years by it. That was called the Year of the Elephant. What this refers to is a Christian kingdom had developed in Yemen. And they had built a massive church. And they were hoping that they could get people to convert to Christianity and come to their church in pilgrimage. They knew that they were vying with a very huge history in the Kaaba in Mecca. So the king Abraha, he was commanded to go take an army of elephants and a vast army to go destroy the Kaaba and to tell everybody that the truth is in following Christianity and that they should come to migrate and to make pilgrimage to Yemen. When they came, there was this miraculous intervention in which these massive birds picked up these huge stones and they came and they pelted all of these elephants and all of these soldiers, and many of them were killed and many of them retreated and went back. This sounds like some sort of a sci-fi story, but in fact, this is a well-documented part of Arab history. It's even mentioned in a small chapter of the Quran. Had this have been some sort of mythology, then people would have challenged it. And so this was the same year the Prophet was born. When the Prophet was born, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib was the tribal head of the Quraysh at that time. So his grandfather named him Muhammad, knowing that he was an orphan, that he was hoping that he would be praised, as the word means, the one who is often praised. The Prophet was born, and his mother Amina was looking for someone to be a wet nurse. They used to have the profession of wet nurse back then, in which women would professionally gather a few children as a nanny and breastfeed them for a year or two. And so the Prophet being an orphan, these women are usually looking to get paid by the father. So the Prophet Muhammad was the last one when a group of women came. One woman came on her donkey that was a little bit weak and injured, and the old camel that her husband had. And they came in with their other child that they were giving milk to. So they found Muhammad and they decided to take him in. As she set up her camp that night and she looked to breastfeed, she was blown away that even though they had very little resources or rations or water supply, her breasts were filled, and so she was able to feed Muhammad and the other child to their full. Similarly, the camel is an older female camel that generally does not carry milk. And so the father was blown away when he saw that this camel had milk. The next day when they got up and they were going back to where their tribe was outside of Mecca, they found that the camel and the donkey both have strong energy and they are able to just move fastly. And so she declared to everyone, I have this blessed child. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was born miraculously in a miraculous time, and actually his whole life was filled with miracles. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was sent with many miracles. And so throughout his life, people saw the moon split when they challenged him. He told them to look at the moon, and the full moon was split into halves over the mountains, and then it came back together in front of their eyes. And there was a time when there was a drought, and they had nothing to eat because the crops had all started to die and wither away in the desert, arid climate. And so the man came to the Friday prayer and asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, to pray. He raised his hands and prayed that God would send down rain upon them, and it rained and poured as immediate response to the prayer. One time the Prophet, peace be upon him, was traveling around the outskirts of Mecca and met a young man who was a shepherd. So he asked him, can I have some milk from one of those sheep? And him and Abu Bakr were standing there. And the man said, well, these aren't my sheep, so I have no right to give you any of the milk. So the Prophet said, what about that barren sheep right there that doesn't seem to have milk? What if somehow I was able to get milk out of that? He said, well, obviously you can't get milk out of that. So if you want to try, you can. And so, of course, this young man is confused. But when he looked at the Prophet and he said, in the name of God, and then he started to pull on those udders, that bowl filled up with milk. And then he gave it to Abu Bakr, and then another bowl of milk, and he gave it to him, and then he drank another bowl of milk. And there were many examples of this throughout the life of the Prophet. There were many times in which they needed more water, and the Prophet put his hands into a bowl of water and prayed to God, and the water overflowed that dozens of people filled up their skins. There was a man, his dad owed his creditors a lot of dates that he had taken, and he had developed his business, and he died in the battle. And so the Prophet, peace be upon him, prayed on the pile of dates, and they started pulling out the dates to pay back these men, and the pile seemed to not diminish in any way. And these are some of the many examples of the miraculous life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. I will conclude with one simple story of a young man who lived 60, 70 years after the Prophet. He used to introduce himself to people that I am the grandson of the one who, when God's noble messenger saw that my grandfather's eye had been knocked out from an arrow that was shot at him in a battle, that he prayed on it and he put the eye back into the eye socket. And then my grandfather said that his sight was perfectly fine from then on, even better than his other eye. This is our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him.